Hello, my name is Peter Raymer, and in this second D365 Debug tutorial, we're going to look at another example of an error message and figure out how you can solve it. So give you more practice. I have another lesson previously and we'll continue with other lessons like this to give you a lot of practice on how to troubleshoot different error messages, give you different techniques and processes on how you can get to the bottom of that error message and help users figure that out. So let's get started. So in this example, you can go to the all purchase orders form. Before you do that, make sure you're in a sandbox environment with the Contoso data deployed, and then go up to the top right and change your company or legal entity, as it's called, to USP2, Contoso Orange Juice. You can do this in some other environments, but it's helpful if you follow along in this company to do this example. So the replication steps are go to the accounts payable module, then go to the purchase orders submenu, and then all purchase orders. You can click on it right here or search for all purchase orders up top. This is going to take us to the purchase orders list page to see all the purchase orders. From here, we want to create a new purchase order. So go click this new button up at the top. It's going to bring up this dialog on the right hand side, which is going to ask you for details on creating your new purchase order. What we need to do now is click on this one-time supplier checkbox. When we do that, we actually get a warning message, and it actually resets the field back to no. The error message says one-time vendor account specified in vendor parameters does not exist in the vendor table. Okay, so those are our replication steps. This is what we're going to try to solve. And I'm again want to emphasize that the importance of this is practicing those debugging skills, practicing those techniques on how to solve this. If you functionally have seen this before and you know how to solve it, that's great. That's the fastest way. But there are many error messages throughout the D365 system that you may not know how to solve just from the details provided in the message. So I want to show you how you can go further and solve that message yourself. We can see in this case, it tells us that this vendor account is specified in the vendor parameters. If you know something about the system, vendor parameters, you might know where that form is. Maybe not. But let's pretend, again, that this is a little confusing, and let's use our different techniques on how we can solve this problem. So the first and usually easiest way to go through our 4 steps, and maybe I'll back up and cover the 4 steps we need to do to solve this problem. First, we need to find the line of code that this error message is coming from. That's step 1. Step 2 is we want to look at the if statement or condition surrounding that code to determine what is the conditions that cause this error message to show. By knowing that condition, we can maybe change something and have it not go into that if statement and not throw this error message and continue on. So third, after we find what that condition is, determine what we need to do to change or what data needs to be changed, we need to find where in the front end of D365 we can change that data to fix this error. And then fourth, finally, we need to find the data on that form, make that change, try again and see if it works. So those are our 4 steps. So step 1 is how do we find where in code that this error message comes from? And there's a few different approaches. Last time we looked at the find labels approach. This time I'm going to show you find labels plus another technique, and we'll just keep going through a few different techniques throughout these tutorials. So I'm going to highlight the first part of this label, and then I'm going to come back into Visual Studio here, and then I'm going to go to Extensions, Dynamics 365, Find Labels. So I'll pause right there so you can kind of follow along. But this Find Labels allows us to search for a particular label and find what label ID that message is coming from. So usually this is used so you could modify this label, or you could add another language, etc. to this label. In this case, we can use this form and find all references to find where in code this is used. So in this case, you can see I've already typed in the first part of this error message, one-time vendor account specified. I don't have to type in the full message. Sometimes if this is too long of a message, then this form will take a long time finding that label. So sometimes searching for just the first part of the message is great. And in this case, I can see that there's just one result. It's the sys 57595 label. Great. And that fully matches the message we're seeing. So then what I can do is right click anywhere on this row and then select Find References. What that's going to do is go through all of the code that we have in D365 and look for anywhere in the text that we have this @sys 57595. And it's going to bring it up in this window in the background here. So now that we've done that, I can actually cancel or close out of this label search form. So I'll go ahead and do that. So luckily, I can see there's only one result. Sometimes we get, a few results or dozens or 100 or 1,000 results, and this may not be a great approach. But in this case, we've got one result, so it makes it really easy. It's in the table, then table, in the method called create one-time account validate. If I double click on this, it's going to actually open the code editor for me to find this. I could have gone over here and typed then table, found the table we're talking about right here, expanded out the methods, found create one-time account validate right here, and I could have double clicked from here and opened it up, but by double clicking on these find symbol results, it opens it straight away for me, which is really, really nice. All right, so we have found the place in code, and we're pretty sure, because there's only one of them, where this error message is occurring. If I hover over this @sys label, I can see that same error message and confirm we're in the right place. All right, so step one of finding the place in code is done. And then step two would be to look at the condition as to why this is happening. But before I do that, I want to briefly, or try to briefly, show you another approach. Let's say you couldn't find the label, or this wasn't using a label, or some other errors happening where data is getting changed, or a field's being disabled, or something that you don't want to have happen, but you're not able to use this find label approach. What would you do? In that case, another approach, and we'll show several different ones throughout these lessons, is start at the beginning of your action and try to find the code there and debug from there. So what I mean by that is if I go back to this form, I've gone from the purchase order form, I've clicked the new button, I'm on this create purchase order dialog, and then what have I done? I've clicked this one-time supplier. That's my last action, and when I do it immediately, I get this error message. So I really want to start from the code that gets run when I check this radio button. And if I can find that code, maybe I can debug forward to find where this error message is in code. I know we've already found it, but again, I want to show you this approach because this may not always work. All right, so how would I go about finding what code gets run when this radio button is changed? One thing I can do is figure out what form are we looking at right here in this dialog box. And the way I can do that is right click anywhere in this form, select or hover over this form information, and then I can see this second menu that says the form name is Perch Create Order. So that's really awesome. Now I can come back to Visual Studio, search for perch, create order, and then look for, I don't want a class, I want a form, and look for where that radio button is in this form. But unfortunately, I can see that there's maybe a bunch of controls right on this form. Maybe there's a whole lot more on the form that you're looking at. So how would I look for that? I could try to start to expand in here and look and maybe figure out, okay, this is the first field on the form, so let me find that. But there's a little bit of a better way. What I can actually do is right click on the label associated with this control. So we don't want to right click on the control itself. It doesn't always, if you right click in a field, it won't show you the right menu. But if you right click on the label just above it, then you can hover over form information. You can come over to where the form name is. We can actually already see the control name, but I want to show you a little bit more. If I click on this form name menu right here, it's going to bring up one more dialog, which is really helpful and give us a lot of helpful information. So specifically, I can again, I'll scroll down. I can see that the name of the form here is perch create order. So same thing, we could have found it on this form. The next thing that I can find is the name of this control name is perch table one time vendor. That's awesome. So I'm going to grab this control name, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to come back to Visual Studio. Again, I could expand these nodes looking for it, but there's a faster way. I can actually just paste that control name up in this top search bar and hit enter, or just wait and it'll actually filter all of our nodes to just be this one control. Awesome. We found it in our control. It shows us exactly where it is. Now what I'm looking for, and I should have, I guess, explained to begin with, is because the error message is happening right away, there should be code in the modified method of this form control. If it was in the save or the write of a data source or an update, if it was a validate write, those would only occur when you hit the save button on a form. So that's very common. But in this case, if the action we're doing and the response happens right away, then it's got to happen either in the modified method of a form control, the modified method of a data source field control, or the modified field method on a table. Those are usually the three places that we need to check. So first one we're going to check is this form control and see if there's a modified method here. So now that we found the form control, I can expand it, expand methods, and oh no, there's no method called modified that's been overridden on this form control. So this must not be the right place. That's okay. That's actually expected. Usually, unless you've got a clicked method on a button, you're not going to see as often code directly on the form control, because it's a best practice to actually put it on the data source field modified method. So what data source and field is this control being using? And there's actually two different ways we can find that out. One is straight from this front form information. We can see that the data source is called perch table, and we can see that the data field is called one-time vendor. Now we know what the name of the field is on this data source. If we weren't looking here, we could also figure it out from this form design. We can right click on this form design, select properties. That's going to open this properties window, and we can see right here the data source is perch table and the data field is one-time vendor. Perfect. Two different ways of finding the same thing. All right, next I'm going to come back to this search. I'm going to clear out that top search and hit enter. Oops, to make it go away. Now it's not filtered out all of our other nodes. We can see all of them. And I can come over to this left pane and expand the data sources. I can see, sure enough, there is a data source called perch table. I can expand that now. Then I can expand this fields node right here. And now we found out that the field we're looking for is called one-time vendor. So I can actually just click in here and start typing one-time vendor, or I could scroll down and try to find it. So now we found one-time vendor. Again, I'm going to expand this node, and then I see there's a methods node. I'm going to expand that, and aha, now we see there is a modified method on this data source field, which is what we expected. So I can actually just double click this, and it's going to open up the code behind for this form, right? You could have gone all the way back up to the top, right clicked and said view code, but that wouldn't take you directly to the method we're looking for. So by double clicking on the method itself, that's really nice. We can just take us to the code behind form and directly to this modified method starting on line 734 of my version of the code. So that's great. Now I don't immediately see our error message, right? But this shows me where the start is of our code that we can put a breakpoint in and start debugging until we get an error message printed out. So we can actually add a breakpoint on the very first line of code and then start debugging from here. So this is the first line of code, this super. I can add a breakpoint either by clicking on this vertical bar right here on the line that I want. It's going to just add a red circle, which is our breakpoint. Or I can stick my cursor here and push the F9 key. That's also going to toggle a breakpoint. So I definitely recommend you memorize that F9 key. All right, we've added a breakpoint. Again, the purpose of this is to allow the debugger to show us every single line of code until we get to the one where our trouble is starting, our error message is being shown, or some other problem that we want to investigate. Knowing the line of code gives us so much power over what we need to do next. All right, so to debug, you can look at my other articles or videos to kind of refresh you on how to debug, but real quickly you can click on debug and then attach to process in Visual Studio. From here it's going to bring up this form. Sometimes you may want to click show processes from all users, but then you can search for IIS Express. And so I see this one, I don't want the IIS Express tray, I want IISExpress.exe. Select that line and then click this button, attach. At this point, the system's going to load all of the symbols that it needs to be able to catch any breakpoints that I hit. So initially you're going to get this red circle with an outline and a black or a white middle circle, but after some amount of time, it may even take a couple minutes, you're going to get this filled in red circle, and that way you know your symbols have loaded. If you have trouble loading your symbols, look at my other articles that give you a few settings and options you need to change to make sure that those symbols have loaded. Well, we've got it loaded. We're all set. We're ready to debug. Now we just need to follow our replication steps once more to hit that breakpoint. So I'm going to close this form information form. I could back all the way out. If I wanted to click the new button, then I need to click the one-time supplier, and my breakpoint should get hit, which sure enough, it does switch back to Visual Studio. I get this yellow arrow, which shows me that this is my current line of code that the system's running. That is great. From here, I could look at the info log and see what prints out until I get this error message. So I'm going to hit F10. I could actually hit F10 once more. And if I do that, I actually see, oh, my error message has printed out. So it must have actually happened back in this previous line of code. Okay, so I'm actually just going to hit continue and let the system show it. Now I can kind of reset, and I can click it once more to try it again. And now I can push F10, or F10 is just the step over key, which is right up here. You can also just click this little icon in the toolbar. And then, now that I know that the error message occurs in that line, I can clear all messages to see it again. I can step in to this method. So step in is this button right here, or F11. So I'm going to push F11. And now I step in, and oh, look at that. I see that this method prints out an error message, and if I hover over it, Visual Studio translates that label for me into plain text. I can see that that is the error message I'm seeing. Great, we found another way of finding our error message. Awesome. From here, I could use the debugger to try to help me figure out what is wrong with this condition that's causing it to go in here. Oftentimes using your locals or your watch is really helpful. In this particular case, because it's got some nested methods, that's not going to help me as much. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit stop. But you can definitely debug and use that to help you figure out why is it actually going inside this error message or inside this if statement and printing out the error message. So I'll hit stop. So now you've learned two different ways, the find labels and the start from the beginning and debug method for finding this line of code. Definitely find labels seems to be a lot faster, but again, you may not always be able to use it. All right, so step 2 of our 4 steps after finding the code is we need to look at the condition and determine what it means. In here, I can see that there's 2 methods. This first method is calling find on vend parameters. I know from experience that parameter tables only have one record that ever get created, and so they don't get past a parameter. I could F12 into this find method and kind of prove it to myself and say, yep, this is just finding a single parameter record, not based on a parameter. Then I could click the back arrow a couple times to get back to this line of code. So this finds a single parameter record, then it's reading this field called default vend. Okay, that's interesting. Then this whole value that it gets out is passed into the vend table find method. I can F12 in this find method or right click and say go to definition, same thing. That's going to show me what this find method does. It takes a vend account as its first parameter, and if I scroll down enough, I can see what that does is it uses that parameter to find one record in the vend table where the account num equals this vend account. All right, so it's looking for a vendor that matches this vend account. Now I can hit back a few times to get back here. And then lastly, I can see that there's this exclamation point right in front. That actually means not or do the opposite of. So essentially, if this whole thing does not return a vendor with populated data, then this not will make it return true, and it'll go into here. Really, it's checking, does this record have a rec ID? If that rec ID is 0, then this not is going to turn it to a 1, and now it's going to go in here and say, hey, we did not find a vendor that is valid for this vend parameters. So now what we need to do is figure out what's wrong with this default vend. Is it not set at all, or is it set to an invalid value? All right, so step 2 is done. We've looked at the condition. We've determined what the condition means. Step 3 is we need to find where in the front end of D365 we need to navigate in order to look at and potentially modify this data. So vend parameters is the table. Where do we find the front end for this form? What I can do is I can come up in Application Explorer and paste and search for that. I can search for the table, and if I look for the table and find it, like last time I told you, you can right click and say find all references on this table. Then you can look at all the places it's used, try to find what form this table is used as a data source on. And whoops, I don't know why it's opened the wrong viewer there. Let's try that again. Find all references. There we go. There's 192 matches. So that's going to be maybe a little difficult for us to find this way, but this is the longer way. You can kind of find most things. If I scroll down far enough, I can actually find there is a form named vend parameters. So that's a pretty good guess of what we think is maybe it. Then I can right click on the Venn table or Venn parameters form, do the same thing, and find that there is a menu item that points to this form. And then I can scroll down and find that menu item. But kind of as I've said before, most of the time the table, the form, the menu item are named the same thing. So by searching Venn parameters, I can quickly scan, check to see if there's a display menu item, which there is right here. I know it's getting hidden here by my face, but here we go, this Venn parameters. Now once I found the menu item, I can do find all references once more to find where is the menu in, what's the path of the menu through the front end to get to that Venn parameters form. And sure enough, I can see that there's this menu. There's actually a couple different menus, but this one looks good. It says it's accounts payable, then setup, then Venn parameters. And these are the names of the nodes within the Application Explorer. What I can always do is look at the properties and say, I see this menu actually refers to the label accounts payable. That's what it's going to be called on the front end. This one right here has the label of setup on the front end. And then this one actually has the label of accounts payable parameters on the front end as well. I'd have to, I think, click back here on our menu item and then look here on the label and see, yep, sure enough, accounts payable parameters. So now I figured out how to get to this form on the front end. Great, that's step 2. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this tab so that we can go there on the front end and check out that field. So we found out if we go to modules, accounts payable, then under setup, then accounts payable parameters. I'll click right there, or you can search using this top search bar. Okay, great. I'm on the accounts payable parameters. Just one quick note, you'll notice it's not called vendor parameters like this label seemed to indicate. So that's why these labels are not always super clear. It's called accounts payable parameters. Now that I'm on here though, where am I supposed to go? Which field on all these tabs do I find the field that I need to care about? So again, we can keep using find references as our friend. So if we go back here, then I can go to Venn parameters, find default Venn, and it's on the Venn parameters table. So great, we can go back to Venn parameters table, go to the field default Venn, and I could do find all references to try to find where this field is on that form, or I could do a search for it on that Venn parameters form itself. I already know that it's got to be on the Venn parameters form, so when I do find all references on the table, I can skip past all these classes, the tables, and really just look for where is it on the Venn parameters form. And I can see that there's 2 of these instances. One is showing us that it's a data source field. Okay, that's great, but doesn't show me where it is on the front end. This other one, though, shows me where it is on the form design. Unfortunately, just by selecting it from the find symbol results, it takes me directly to where it is in the form design. And I can kind of scroll up and see how did we get here. We got there from this tab general, then the general tab. So really this first tab right here, I can even see it in the preview pane. I can see it's on the vendor tab page. Okay, so that's kind of the 4th list page on this general tab on the side. Then it's in the first group and the first field here. And then I could potentially even look at what is the label of this field back on the table, right? If I go back here, select the properties, I could see that this has a label of one-time vendor account. Awesome, I'm feeling much better. Now if I go back to this accounts payable parameters form, and I'm on the general tab, I go down to the vendor fast tab, I look for that first field, the one with one-time vendor account, and this is the field that's we need to look at. Awesome, so kind of step 3 is done. Find where that form is, find where we need to change this data on the front end. Step 4 is consider, do we need to make a change to this data, and retry. So our if condition said that if this is an invalid value, it's not pointing to a real vendor, then we get that error message. So sure enough, I see that this is blank. It's not set to a real vendor. So I can just click the drop down, and in my case, I'm just going to pick a random one of these. You know, it doesn't really matter, right? I'll maybe click this first one and make sure that it gets set. And then I'm going to hit the save button. It's really important that I click save, because if I don't save, when I try to retry, it won't actually be committed to the database. Awesome. So we think we figured it out, but let's try it out. So let me go back to the beginning, try our steps again. I'm on the all purchase orders form. I click new, pop up this dialog. Now I click this one-time supplier, and whew, it actually worked. I didn't get an error message. It stayed checked as yes. So clearly it made it past that if statement, past where it said check failed, and kept moving on in code. Awesome. We've now solved our problem. So hopefully you've learned something new today. We learned how to use find labels to find the code. We also learned how to debug and determine where to put a breakpoint and debug from the first, or really the last action of our replication steps, to also find where that error message is occurring. We looked at the condition and what was affecting that error message. We figured out how to navigate in the front end system to where we need to change the data. And then lastly, we made a change. We tried our replication steps again, and we got past our error message. So thank you again so much for watching. We'll cover more of these kind of debugging steps. A lot of it will be some repetitive pieces, but it's really important for you to practice, as the variances are really where it can get tricky, and practicing these steps are what's going to help you solve some more complex errors. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, click the like button. I also invite you to push the subscribe button as well. If there's other topics you would like to see a video on, please post in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you.